Thank you, thank you. Hope you feel the same way afterwards. But welcome to this presidential plenary session. Before I get to my presidential address, I want to begin with a few announcements. First, after this session, there's a president's reception from 6 to 7, Marquee Ballroom A, plenty of food and drink, so I hope to see you there. And then at 9 tonight, the Minority Fellowship Dance, Marquee Ballroom C, a great cause, a fun event, and a very special event this year. The Hot Spots will be performing from 9 to 11. This is our 20th anniversary performance, possibly their farewell performance. And so you need to be there. I order you as president to be there. So I expect to see you there at 9 o'clock. And then from 11 to 1, Ruby Valley and the Sophonics performing in the same venue. So another great band here from Atlanta. Usually, the President's Justice Award is presented at this time, immediately before the President's talk. But the President's Justice Award will be presented at 11:30 tomorrow morning to Congressman John Lewis in this room. I didn't schedule him for today because at the time we weren't sure whether or not Congress would be in session, so we didn't want to chance it. And also I didn't want to speak immediately after Congressman John Lewis because, that's something no speaker wants to do, and you'll find out why tomorrow. But very briefly, Congressman John Lewis is one of the heroes of the civil rights movement. And he's also been called the conscience of the U.S. Congress. And I'll say a little bit more about Congressman Lewis at the end of my presidential address. And finally, Congressman Lewis's talk tomorrow will be followed by the ASC brunch at noon. Before I begin my address, I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about some recent ASC initiatives, kind of give you a mini state of the ASC. And these, oops, okay. These are some initiatives I think you should be aware of because they may affect you and in some cases the discipline as a whole, and we hope they'll affect crime policy as well. And also you might contribute to some of these initiatives. Certain of them you may have heard about, but I want to reinforce. And very recently, the ASC joined with ACJS to form a National Policy Joint Oversight Committee. This committee is chaired by Charles Welford, and it's going to focus on educating members of Congress and the executive branch about the importance of funding for criminal justice research and statistics. And they're going to coordinate with the other agencies in this area, agencies like the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And in fact, we've already begun to work with them. We have appointed an ASC liaison to that organization, Anthony Braga. We hope to expand to additional organizations as well. When we meet with members of Congress and we say, we're from the ASC, it's their plight, but when you have some police chiefs, correctional workers, and so on saying, hey, these people do important research and you need to fund it, that carries a lot of weight. And so we're really excited about this. This is a critical time, of course, with respect to crime policy. We're, of course, concerned about funding, so we want to do everything we can to ensure that there's no big reduction in funding. But also, the Department of Justice began under Lori Robinson and is continuing under her replacement. They're really reaching out to us. They're telling us, we want to work with you. They've embraced evidence-based policies. Members of the Department of Justice, Karen Mason, for example, Director of Office Justice Programs were here, the directors of NIJ, BJS, and they basically gave the same message that we like what you do, we want to know more about it, we want to work with you. Karen Mason said, basically, we need you. So we're really excited about that as well. We also have an ASC National Policy Committee. Todd Clear just stepped down as chair, replaced by Laura Dugan, and they're going to shift their focus somewhat. Among other things, they're going to organize policy-related sessions for the annual meeting. And again, we had a great start this year with a lot of excellent sessions. And Laura and the committee have a number of other excellent ideas in mind. You're going to be hearing about those soon. In addition, we formed a Media Relations Committee, chaired by Ted Guest, president of Criminal Justice Journalists. We've asked him to look into how ASC might foster stronger ties between criminologists and the media. You, of course, hear a great deal about crime in the media, most recently topics like school violence, mental illness and violence, the effect of media violence, guns and crime, and so on. But the media often overlook relevant criminological research, and we hope to change that. We've also formed a committee to look into whether the ASC should have an ethics code, and if so, how we should go about developing it. Nancy Rodriguez chairs that committee, had a session at these meetings. You'll be hearing more about that, I'm sure. We've appointed an associate editor for the criminologist, Susan Sharp, and she's going to work with the incoming editor, Karen Heimer, to expand the content of the criminologist. Becky Block, the outgoing editor, has already done a lot here, And we hope to build on our efforts, but we really appreciate all that she has done. And if you have any ideas for the criminologist, please share them with us, Susan Sharp and Karen Heimer. We've created a resources tab on the ASC website, quick link to a lot of the really excellent resources that we have. Videos of the presidential addresses, of course, it's a critical one. Sullivan Award address videos, congressional luncheon briefing videos, videos done through the ASC Oral History Project, and this is a fantastic resource. You can get on and you can see interviews, people like Robert Merton, Gil Geis, Frida Adler, etc., syllabi collection, link to our mentoring program, and a lot of additional things. So be sure to check that out. I'm pleased to report we're moving toward a greener ASC. For the first time this year, as many of you discovered, we have a downloadable app containing the program. The only problem is people are still, they're taking the app and they're taking hard copies as well. But we hope as your confidence in the app builds, you'll begin to move away from the hard copies. But you may have noticed the hard copies are a lot smaller. And that's not because there are many fewer sessions. There are 913 sessions at these meetings, but because we've eliminated a lot of white space, made some other changes. Hard copy is less than half of its previous size. And last but not least, we formed the ASC Long Range Planning Committee. And its primary charge is to examine how well the ASC is achieving its major goals, recommend ways we might better achieve our goals, and consider additional goals we might pursue. And the goals of the ASC, by the way, are described in the ASC Constitution, which is on the ASC website. But this committee is chaired by Julie Horney, has many distinguished members, and if you have any suggestions about the ASC future direction, please share them with Julie. That said, let me now shift my presidential address. First, let me begin by saying that I'm not talking about general strain theory. Although I realize that I was elected president largely because of my work on GST, and I'm a nice personality, I'm sure, as well, but I continue to do work on general strain theory, as do many other people. In fact, I just published a paper that deals with what I think is a central problem of general strain theory. A lot of data indicate that the criminogenic strains identified by general strain theory increase crime. They increase crime partly through their effect on negative emotions. But there's only mixed support for another key prediction of general strain theory. GST states that a range of factors influence or condition the effect of strains on crime. Factors like poor coping skills and resources, low social support, low social control, association with delinquent peers, and so on. But evidence here on conditioning effects is mixed at best. Well, this paper explains why this might be the case, and it revises my prediction about conditioning effects in the hope that we'll be able to better explain why some people are more likely than the others to cope with strains through crime. I'm also not going to talk about what will probably be my major area of research over the next few years, and that's the relationship between climate change and crime. There is very good reason to believe that climate change will be the major crisis to confront humanity. And it's going to have far-ranging, largely negative effects, and I believe one of these effects is going to be increased crime. In fact, I argue that over the next few decades, climate change will become one of the major forces, if not the major force, driving crime. And that's going to happen through the effect of climate change on things like food and fresh water shortages, natural disasters, poverty, inequality, social conflict, perceptions of injustice, and so on. And I plan to continue my research into the social consequences of climate change, including consequences for crime, but the other negative social consequences as well. And in this area, I might mention, I'm very pleased to see that there's been a rapid increase in the growth of green criminology. A lot of papers presented on that topic at these meetings. There was an excellent presidential panel on that topic at these meetings. So, okay, that's what I'm not going to talk about. What am I going to talk about? Well, my talk today derives from my third area of research on what I call the underlying assumptions of crime theories. Assumptions regarding such things as the nature of crime, free will versus determinism, the nature of society. And today my talk focuses on assumptions regarding the nature of human nature. And it's titled, as you can see, Social Concern and Crime, Moving Beyond the Assumption of Simple Self-Interest. Now, the theme of these meetings is expanding the core. And perhaps the core assumption of criminology is that people are naturally self-interested. focused on the satisfaction of their needs and desires. And crime is said to be most likely when people haven't learned to control the pursuit of their interests, or when they're in environments where their interests are better served through crime. Most crime theories are, again, built on this assumption, and most crime control initiatives focus on reducing the criminogenic pursuit of self-interest, usually by increasing the costs of crime. Well, in my talk tonight, I present an expanded view of human nature, and I discuss the implications of this view for the causes and control of crime. In particular, I argue that people are naturally socially concerned as well as self-interested. In particular, I argue people possess a biologically based set of inclinations that sometimes lead them to give more consideration to others than to their own interests. And social concern has 4 elements. People are inclined to care about the others, form close ties to and cooperate with the others, follow certain moral intuitions, and conform. And while social concern is biologically based, I argue that the social environment has a large effect on the level and nature of social concern. And finally, in the key part of my presentation, I argue that social concern has fundamental implications for crime. In particular, social concern has direct, indirect, mediating, and conditioning effects of crime, although I also argue that there's some circumstantial variation in the effect of social concern on crime. So basically, that's what I'm going to say tonight. And my presentation builds on Chapter 4 from my book, Toward a Unified Criminology, but it extends Chapter 4 in important ways. This is not, Wayne and some of those at criminology will appreciate it, this is not an overly similar presentation. There's significant extension of that Chapter 4. And my presentation will be in 4 parts. First, I'm going to briefly discuss the dominant role of self-interest in criminology. And then I'm going to talk about the nature of social concern, its 4 elements, a little bit on how it differs from certain other concepts like self-control. Then I'm going to talk about the effects of social concern on crime. And here I basically develop a theory of social concern in crime. Because of time limitations, I can't describe this theory in great detail, but I'll present basically an outline of the theory to you, give you some sense of what the theory is about, and of course, the article in criminology, you could read the details. And then finally, I'll talk about directions for further research and policy implications. Before I get into the actual heart of the presentation, though, a little background. This work on social concern and crime, I think, was motivated by 2 things. One, kind of personal experience and observation. As a criminologist, I, of course, regularly read about the very harmful acts that people commit against their fellow people. And when you read these acts, it's easy to conclude that people, yes, are very self-interested. They're not really concerned about other individuals. But in my personal everyday life, and when I observe people around me, I regularly observe people engaging in a range of pro-social behaviors, even when it doesn't seem to be in their self-interest to do so, even when it carries some cost. And so I've always had this gut feeling that people are both bad and good, that yes, they're self-interested, but also they have some social concern. And then the second major motivation for this talk is that in the last 10, 15 years, there's really been an explosion of research in a variety of different areas that basically confirm that gut feeling that I had, that I suspect many of you had, research dealing with various aspects of social concern. And some of you might have been exposed to some of this research, even though it's largely, although not entirely, outside criminology. Some of the research has found its way into the popular media, particularly sources like the New York Times, and you may have seen discussions of some of the books with titles like Super Cooperators, The Righteous Mind, A Cooperative Species, Primates and Philosophers, How Morality Evolved. And so when I saw that research, that combined with this gut feeling, led me to reconsider the assumption of self-interest and begin to think how that reconsideration, how that incorporation of social concern might impact what we do in criminology. But in any event, let me begin by discussing the dominance of self-interest in criminology. And here I argue that the criminological assumption of self-interest has 3 key components. 1, people are strongly motivated to satisfy their needs and desires, especially their short-term needs and desires. And this provides much motivation for crime because crime is often the easiest, most expedient way to get what you want. A lot easier to steal the money you need than to go out and get a job and work for it. Second, People give priority to their interests over those of the others. Scofferson and Hershey's state in the general theory of crime. People think of and act first for themselves. They are not naturally inclined to subordinate their interests to those of the others. And third, people are somewhat rational in the pursuit of their interests. They give some conscious consideration to the costs and benefits of behaviors, and they tend to choose those behaviors that increase their benefits, reduce their costs. That's not, of course, to say that people are perfectly rational, and there's a very large literature, as I'm sure many of you are aware, about how the assumption of rationality is often violated, but in the end, it's typically argued that crime is motivated mainly by its anticipated benefits. And self-interest is said to be a part of human nature because it has a substantial biological basis and characterizes the large majority of people. Evolutionary theorists explain the pervasiveness of self-interest by arguing that individuals who put their interests over others are more likely to survive and reproduce. And this quote from Darwin makes that point. And up until recently, most evolutionary theorists agreed with this sort of argument. But as I'll describe in a minute, there's been really a sea change. Well, again, self-interest, I think, dominates criminology. It has a fundamental impact on the causes of crime that are examined. People are self-interested. They should offend when the costs of crime are low and the benefits are high. And classical deterrence, control theories focus on the costs of crime. Classical deterrence theory, of course, focuses on the formal costs of crime, sanctions by the state. Control theory also looks at the informal costs of crime, sanctions by parents, teachers, neighbors, stake in conformity, what you have to lose if you engage in crime, and so on. Social learning, rational choice, routine activities theories consider both variation in the costs of crime and in the benefits of crime. Control theory argues the benefits of crime are comparable across individuals, but the other theories disagree. So social learning theory argues, for example, that the benefits of crime are higher for some individuals because they're in environments where crime is more likely to be differentially reinforced. Self-control theory focuses on the individual's awareness of and responsiveness to the costs and benefits of crime. So individuals who are low in control, well, they give a little thought to the costs of crime, especially the long-term costs. They don't care very much about these costs, but they're very attracted to the benefits of crime. So the assumption of self-interest then has a fundamental impact on the causes of crime that we consider with this focus on the costs and the benefits of crime and traits related to consideration given the costs and benefits. And the assumption of self-interest has had a major impact on efforts to control crime. Most crime control efforts focus on increasing the costs of crime. Criminal justice system is focused on increasing the certainty and especially the severity of sanctions. And even prevention and rehabilitation programs tend to focus on the costs and benefits of crime. So, for example, these programs teach parents, teachers, and others how to better exercise direct control. They try and increase the individual's stake in conformity so they'll have more to lose if they engage in crime. They try and instill self-control and so on. As my colleague at Emory University, Franz de Waal, states, it is assumed that the task of society is to tame self-interest, creating a cultural overlay, a thin veneer hiding the otherwise selfish and brutish nature. And that's an assumption that I think very much applies to criminology. So in sum, again, most of the leading crime theories, most of the major crime control strategies, based on this assumption that individuals are naturally self-interested. But a lot of recent research in many different areas challenges the assumption that people are simply self-interested, that human nature is more complex, that people are, yes, self-interested on the one hand, but socially concerned on the other. Self-interest in particular exists alongside a set of biologically based inclinations that serve to suppress or regulate self-interest and thereby make cooperative societies possible. In particular, I define social concern as, you see, a set of biologically based inclinations that sometimes lead people to give more consideration to others than to their own interests. And the existence of social concern, as I say, suggested by research in several areas, recent research on altruism, empathy, pro-social behavior, moral intuitions, social value orientations, behavioral economics, evolutionary psychology, primate behavior, early childhood development, human universals. Again, chapter 4 of my book, Toward a Unified Criminology, summarizes much of the research in this area. And the article that I'll be publishing in Criminology provide sites to additional summaries and key work in these different areas. Well, that said, let me move on to the nature of social concern. Taken as a whole, the research in these various areas suggests that social concern has 4 elements. In particular, social concern includes an inclination to care about others. Survey, observational, experimental data suggest that the large majority of people feel distress at the suffering of innocent others. And people are inclined to help innocent others in need, particularly when they personally encounter these others. This is the case even when there is no benefit and some cost to providing the help. Social concern also includes a desire for close ties to certain others, including ties of an emotional and cooperative nature. Data from a variety of sources indicate that people seek close emotional ties to certain others, even when these ties provide no extrinsic rewards. Further, people want to feel accepted and valued by these others. And people suffer serious negative emotional and other effects when they're rejected by others. People are also inclined to cooperate with the others in instrumental endeavors, even when selfish behavior would be to their greater advantage. For example, when people are asked to play games that provide the opportunity for selfish and cooperative behavior, they tend to cooperate, even though their interests will be better served through selfish behavior. People are also inclined to punish those who do not cooperate, even at some cost to themselves. Third, people are inclined to follow certain moral intuitions, as well as punish those who violate these intuitions. Data from a variety of sources, experiments, surveys that ask people how they would respond to moral dilemmas, cross-cultural observations, suggest that people share certain moral intuitions. Intuitions like not killing or physically harming innocent others, not taking the property of innocent others by force or theft, and treating others in an equitable manner. Among other things, not cheating or engaging in deceptive practices in exchange relationships, not free riding off the contributions of the others, distributing owned resources on the basis of inputs, sharing with equal partners, and so on. It's said that the notion of deservedness, or the idea that people should get what they deserve, is at the heart of these moral intuitions. And finally, people are inclined to conform to the behavior and views of the others, and more generally, to social norms, as well as to sanction those who violate social norms. So a great deal of research, the classic Solomon-Asch experiment, and so on, indicate that people have a very strong inclination to conform to the behavior and views of the others, to social norms more generally, even at some cost to themselves. So for example, people will sit in a room as smoke spews from the vents and not do anything if the people around them, likewise, experimental Confederates, likewise, do the same. Now, research suggests that people act on these 4 inclinations with little forethought, and that such action involves that part of the brain concerned with emotions rather than rational thought. Emotions such as compassion, guilt, anger. In fact, a major contribution of the recent research on social concern is the suggestion that behavior is frequently more habitual and less rational, deliberative than is commonly thought. Occasionally, though, social concern is a result of deliberation. Certain of the inclinations, for example, may be in conflict. The inclination, for example, to conform may sometimes conflict with the inclination to avoid harming innocent others, and there is rational deliberation. So those are the 4 inclinations that comprise social concern. In my criminology paper, I discuss how social concern is similar and different from certain other comments and concepts, and one of those is self-control. And basically what I argue is that self-control refers to kind of an enlightened self-interest. An enlightened self-interest wherein individuals have learned to control the pursuit of their short-term needs and desires, and they are instead focused on the quasi-rational pursuit of their long-term interests. Social concern, by contrast, is a set of biologically based inclinations that sometimes lead individuals to act in ways independent of and even in conflict with their interests, both short and long-term. And further, as mentioned, social concern is often more intuitive than rational, deliberative in nature. But I go on to argue that social concern and self-control are often positively related to one another, but still very much distinct. In fact, one can imagine individuals who are low in social concern but high in self-control, and it's been argued in various places that many white-collar, corporate, and state criminals may fall into this category. Now, after describing the nature of social concern, I argue that there's individual, sociodemographic, and circumstantial variation in social concern. So individual variation, while the large majority of individuals show some social concern and engage in behaviors inspired by that concern, some people seem to possess more social concern than others. So, for example, while most people share in experiments that provide the opportunity for sharing and self-interested behavior, some people share more than others, and there's a small percentage of people who act in a strictly self-interested way. Also, I argue that there are gender and age differences in concern. So females seem to be higher in certain aspects of social concern, care for others, and related to that, empathy, sympathy, compassion. Also some age differences in aspects of social concern, like, for example, the inclination to conform. Also, there's evidence of circumstantial variation in social concern. So concern is weaker when we interact with out-group versus in-group members. Weaker, for example, when we interact with those we see as different on salient dimensions, those who are disliked, not trusted. Social concern is weaker when others violate the moral intuitions or deviate. Social concern is weaker during competitions for scarce resources, including competitions for status or dominance. Many of you know I heard Elijah Anderson speak yesterday. His book, Code of the Street, provides a wonderful example of this, where you have poor inner-city communities where there's fierce competition, particularly among the young males, to some extent the young females in those communities, for status and dominance. And Elijah Anderson describes in a very vivid way how that competition, the very negative effect that it has on social concern, expressions of social concern. And finally, social concern is weaker when individuals are distressed. When you're distressed, that promotes a focus on the self. But again, I want to emphasize that it's not simply the case that individuals are socially concerned. They are socially concerned and they are self-interested. And so the pro-social behavior motivated by social concern, the cooperative behavior, the helping behavior, is also affected by its costs and benefits. So people will cooperate, they will help one another, even when they would benefit more from selfish behavior, but they're more likely to cooperate, they're more likely to help when the costs of doing so are low, the benefits are high. So we have social concern, but there's some variation in it. Individual, socio-demographic, circumstantial. Social concern basically is both a trait variable, some individuals more general social concern than others, and a state variable that varies across circumstances. Now, I'm arguing, of course, that social concern, the inclinations that comprise social concern, are biologically based. On what basis do I make that claim? Well, on the basis of work in several different areas. One, there's evidence that at least some of the inclinations for social concern are universal or close to universal. Inventories of human universals, for example, suggest that people everywhere are inclined to follow social norms, feel distress at the suffering of innocent others. Many of these inclinations appear very early in life. Very young children, before much social learning has occurred, are inclined to form strong attachments to caregivers, show some inclination to help those in distress. Many of the inclinations for social concern are exhibited by non-human primates, where social learning plays a much smaller role. So there's some indication for certain non-human primates, a tendency to avoid harming close others, to some commitment to what we might call reciprocity. Some of the inclinations for social learning are somewhat independent for social concern, are somewhat independent of social learning. So the tendency of young children to help others in distress, for example, is maintained regardless of whether it is rewarded or ignored. There's evidence that many of these inclinations have a strong genetic basis and are linked to aspects of brain structure and functioning. And finally, there's good evidence that these inclinations emerged out of the evolutionary process. That social concern in particular allows for the types of cooperative behavior that provide a major survival advantage. For example, cooperation in the procurement of food and in defense. This cooperation will be impossible if people are inclined to avoid one another, harm one another, cheat one another, disobey one another. So social concern makes cooperation possible and thereby provides a survival advantage. And there is a great deal of work right now among evolutionary theorists describing the particular mechanisms by which social concern provides this advantage, this survival advantage. And there's some debate here, particularly with respect to certain mechanisms like group selection, but nevertheless there's an emerging consensus that social concern did emerge out of the evolutionary process. And again, a very large literature here. Now, while I think the inclinations for social concern are biologically based, I'm a sociologist, I'm in a sociology department, and I recognize that these inclinations are not simply reflexes, but that they're also strongly influenced by environmental factors. And so in my paper, I also describe how the social environment influences the level of social concern, the nature of social concern, so who's viewed as worthy of social concern, what's viewed as harmful, what are some of the conditions under which social concern is said to be more or less applicable, and also the social environment influences the expression of social concern. And I describe these environmental effects by drawing on the major crime theories. So I argue, for example, that social learning affects social concern. So social concern is more likely when we're differentially reinforced for it, exposed to concern models, presented with beliefs that favor social concern, when individuals take care to foster identities with us that prompt social concern. I argue that strain impacts social concern, that individuals experience severe and unjust strain, their social concern is reduced. They come to distrust others. They come to focus on their own distress. I argue that strong social bonds and support increase concern, in part because they reduce strain, in part because they foster the social learning of concern, but also because they foster in-group ties and they foster a positive view of the others. And building on these arguments, I argue that one's social position affects social concern because one's social position, of course, affects things like social learning, social control, and strain. So females, for example, more likely than males to be taught social concern, to be taught to be empathetic, sympathetic, compassionate, etc. They're more often channeled into roles that reward social concern, etc. And likewise, larger social forces affect social concern, community and societal factors. So, for example, cultural values impact social concern. There are some societies with a more collectivist orientation, an emphasis on social harmony, subordinating individual interests to the group, and some more individualistic societies where the emphasis is on the unrestrained pursuit of individual interests. And I argue these cultural differences are, at least in part, related to social and economic organization of societies. So market societies tend to encourage individual competition for personal economic gain. And this, as Curry says, fosters a culture of callousness that undermines social concern. And also, macro differences of concern are related to things like level of macro strain inequality. In a society where there's a lot of inequality, where there's a lot of strain, that fosters self-interest. The others tend to be seen as dissimilar, viewed as a threat, unworthy of concern. And so, while I argue on the one hand, social concern biologically based, I certainly recognize the fundamental impact that the social environment has on social concern as well. Well, having developed this new view of human nature, self-interest and social concern, describe some of the aspects of social concern, in the major part of my paper I ask, what are the implications of social concern for crime? And I argue, one, the existence of social concern means we can't take the motivation for crime for granted. We can't assume that individuals will engage in crime when controls are weak, or in the words of Cohen and Short, when the lid is off. We must consider those factors that pressure or entice individuals to act against their social concern. And strain theory, of course, is very relevant here. I had to say something about sneak strain in somehow. And those of you who are close students of strain theory know that individuals like Merton and especially Cohen, this is one of the basic arguments they made. They were critiquing control theory and saying, it's not just the absence of control. There has to be something more, and there has to be something more because individuals aren't simply self-interested. There is some concern. But given the time at which they were writing, they really weren't able to develop this idea, elaborate on this idea, and present evidence for it. And so in a sense, what I'm doing, as I do with general strain theory, is I'm going back to the classic strain theorists and building on their work. Beyond that, we must take account of the fact that people vary in their level of social concern, and this variation affects the likelihood of crime. We must also take account of the fact that circumstantial factors affect the experience and expression of social concern. And these circumstantial factors also affect the likelihood of crime. So I then go on to develop theory of social concern and crime. And again, I'm not going to get into much detail here. I just outlined the basic elements of the theory, and you could read more in criminology. But I have several propositions regarding social concern and crime. One is that social concern has a direct negative effect on crime. Those high in social concern care about the others, desire strong emotional and cooperative ties to them, possess certain moral intuitions, don't harm innocent others, and have a strong need to conform. And these characteristics should directly reduce the likelihood of most crimes, especially those crimes viewed as harmful, immoral, or deviant. Crimes with these characteristics threaten ties to others, and they run directly counter to the inclinations for social concern. I also argue that social concern has an indirect negative effect on crime through its impact on social and self-control, strain, association with criminal others. The inclinations that comprise social concern foster the formation of strong social bonds with conventional others, such as parents. They also make people more amenable to the socialization and control efforts of these others. And these effects, in turn, contributed to the internalization of moral beliefs, the development of self-control. Further, those high in social concern are less likely to provoke negative treatment from others, reducing their strain. And finally, they should be less likely to associate with criminal others who engage in behaviors they condemn. I argue that social concern conditions the effect of the other causes on crime. So strain, low control, opportunities for crime should be less likely to lead to crime among those high in social concern. Same is true for association with delinquent peers with respect to those aspects of concern involving care for others and the moral intuitions. But association with criminal peers, however, should be more likely to lead to crime among those who desire close ties to others and have a strong inclination to conform. And there's, in fact, some evidence here. But in general, I argue, social concern provides a restraint against crime. It reduces the likelihood that individuals will respond to provocations, to temptations with crime. I argue that social concern partly mediates the effect of biological and social psychological causes on crime. So the experience and expression of social concern is affected in part by biological factors, but also affected by social factors, including, as I mentioned, variables associated with the leading crime theories. So strain has an impact on concern, control does, association with delinquent peers does. And so social concern, to some extent, mediates the effect of these biological factors, strain, control, association with delinquent peers on crime. So even though I don't mention this, for example, in my presentation of general strain theory, I think one of the reasons that strain contributes to crime is because it reduces social concern. And I think we can make a similar argument with respect to many other of the major independent variables that we consider the major causes. And likewise, I argue, Likewise, I argue that social concern partly mediates the effect of macro-level causes on crime, including socio-demographic factors, community characteristics, societal factors as well. And I talk more about that in my article. Now, I want to emphasize that I am not the first person to entertain the idea that aspects of social concern may affect crime. There's been some prior research in this area. This research focuses for the most part on moral beliefs regarding crime, especially the belief that particular crimes are wrong. And this, of course, is a central idea in differential association theory, one of the foundational theories in criminology, and it finds expression in a lot of contemporary theories. To give but just one example, some of the recent work, theoretical work of P.O. Wickstrom at Cambridge, focuses on the central role that moral beliefs play in crime. And there's also been some research on empathy, sympathy in crime. Empathy, sympathy, regard, involves care for others and this tendency to want to help the others in distress. There has been some research here, but the other aspects of social concern, I think, have been largely neglected in criminology. So yes, we look at moral beliefs, but the moral intuitions much broader in scope than beliefs. And we tend to view beliefs strictly as a function of social experiences, where the moral intuitions function of both biological and social factors. There's been some research on empathy, sympathy in crime, most by psychologists, but some prominent criminologists have looked at empathy, sympathy, and crime. David Farrington, Lisa Brody, Joloff, and others, and so on. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm the first one to discover social concern. I certainly am not. But I think by drawing on this larger literature, I point to a range of different aspects of social concern, certain of which, moral beliefs narrowly defined, to a lesser extent empathy, sympathy have received some consideration in criminology, but the others have not. For example, not much research on the relationship between crime and, say, the need for close ties to others, the need for social approval, the need to conform, some of the moral intuitions beyond the belief that particular crimes are wrong. And so, this sort of incorporates some of the prior work in criminology, but sort of presents a more expansive view. You might think, for example, to self-control. A lot of the particular components of self-control certainly received attention in the prior literature, but what Gottfredson and Hershey do is they, in a sense, try and pull it all together in this more general concept, and I'm doing something similar, although very much opposed to what they do with respect to social concern. So there's been some research in this area, and there's good evidence that people who believe that crime is morally wrong are much less likely to engage in crime. Also some evidence that people are higher in empathy and sympathy are somewhat lower in crime. But again, much more work needs to be done. Look at these other aspects of social concern in particular. Now, while the bulk of my theory of social concern on crime focuses on these direct, indirect, mediating, conditioning effects, I also recognize that there is circumstantial variation in the effects of social concern. I guess general strain theory, we have all these conditioning factors. Well, theory of social concern and crime, we're going to have conditioning factors again. And I describe what some of these conditioning factors are. I just say in particular, I'll go through this quickly, the effect of social concern on crime is weaker or positive when people are interacting with out-group members, those they view as different, those they dislike, they distrust, their behavior more motivated by self-interest. Social concern is weaker when people believe that the others have violated the inclinations comprising social concern. So when you believe that the others are immoral, that they don't show concern, that they're free-riding, etc., you're less likely to show concern for them. Social concern is lower when people are competing for scarce resources. It's lower when the costs of acting concern are high, the benefits are low, the ability of acting concern is low. And it's lower in those circumstances where strain is high, social bonds are weak, and people are in the company of criminal others. But having made those arguments, I go on to toy with the notion of what I call universal social concern. And I argue in particular that for some people, social concern is very circumcised. They extend concern just to a small number of people in their in-group, and they quickly abandon their social concern if the cost is a little bit high, if they're feeling a little bit distressed, etc. But then I go on to argue that the other individuals who possess what I call this universal social concern, they extend social concern quite broadly, including to numbers of people who you might think are outside their particular in-group, and they maintain their social concern even when the costs are high, they're under a great deal of strain, they're competing for scarce resources, etc. And this brings me back to Congressman John Lewis. John Lewis was born in Alabama, the son of sharecroppers, attended segregated schools in Alabama, became interested in the civil rights movement at a very early age, inspired by the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and so he was an active participant during the core of the civil rights movement, freedom rides, demonstrations, sit-ins, etc., organizing, leading them. And when doing so, he was attacked on numerous occasions. Among other things, he led the march across the Edmund-Pettus Bridge, Selma, Alabama. This is a picture of him shortly before the marchers brutally attacked by the police in an incident that came to be known as Bloody Sunday, a pivotal incident in the civil rights movement. John Lewis severely injured in that attack. He's been arrested more than 40 times. It's a great speaker for us. Most recently arrested just a few weeks ago at a protest in Washington for immigration reform. And I think that if I experienced just a small fraction of what John Lewis has experienced, I would be a very bitter, hateful person. But you look at John Lewis, he has remained a lifelong advocate of nonviolence, and he has been, throughout his life, both in the civil rights movement, more recently in the U.S. Congress, a champion of justice for all people. And I emphasize that word all. So there you go, some variation in human universal social concern. You have me at one end of the continuum, John Lewis at the other. And so again, I encourage you to hear is what I know will be inspiring words tomorrow, 11:30 in this room. So in sum, the assumption that people are self-interested is at the core of most crime theories and control efforts, but much recent research suggests that people are both self-interested and socially concerned. And further, there is individual, demographic, circumstantial variation in social concern. And so, as I argue, this new view of human nature has fundamental implications for criminology. So directions for further research. One, we need to better describe the inclinations for concern. The descriptions that I present need verification, revision. We need research on the dimensional structure of these inclinations. We need to examine the sources of variation in inclinations, both biological and social, genetic factors, biological factors of a non-genetic nature, head injury, lead exposure, individual constructs like self-control, features of the immediate social environment, the macro social environment. We need to examine the effect of social concern on crime, as I've mentioned, looking at all four of the inclinations for social concern, looking at direct, indirect, conditioning, mediating effects. We need to examine the circumstances said to influence the experience and expression of social concern. So, for example, is social concern lower when there is competition for scarce resources, when the others are viewed as untrustworthy, threatening, immoral? And a key task in doing this research is developing valid measures of the inclinations, especially measures that could readily be used in the survey research that dominates criminology. And there's some challenges here. Some of the inclinations for social concern operate below the conscious level. So, for example, when you ask people, are you influenced by others? Many of them will say no, but then when you do experiments, you find out that they're about as strongly influenced as everyone else. So there's some challenges here, but there's a large literature outside of criminology, and I provide a lot of citations in my criminology article that provides guidance about how we might go about best measuring social concern. And then, assuming that there's some support for the arguments that I make, we need to explore the policy implications of social concern. Most crime control efforts focus on the restraint of self-interest, controlling the bad in people, increasing the certainty and severity of punishment. And while we certainly don't want to abandon those efforts, I think we should also place more emphasis on fostering social concern or cultivating the good in people. Social concern can be directly taught. People can be taught moral beliefs, can be taught empathy, sympathy, and social concern can be fostered in a more indirect manner. Reducing strain, expanding the circle of social concern, for example, by using some of those techniques employed to reduce intergroup prejudice and discrimination. So in conclusion, we need to expand the core assumption of criminology, the assumption that people are simply self-interested, an assumption that has strongly guided crime theories, crime control policies. We need to recognize people are both self-interested and social concern, and examine the fundamental implications of social concern for criminology. So that is my presidential address. Thank you. But hang on. For just 1 second, Joanne. But I'm great. Now, please stand by me. Please stand by me. First, I want to thank several people. And then, as my final act, something I've been looking forward to for a long time. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've actually enjoyed this a great deal. But I get to pass the ASC gavel, the symbol of the ASC presidency, to Joanne. And she will say a few words. And then when she bangs the gavel, only then can you leave for the presidential reception. But first, if you don't mind, I want to say thanks to several people. Susan Sharp and Tim Berzina. Would you stand, please? The program co-chairs. They devoted, as you may know, enormous effort to putting the program together, sometimes working 70-plus hour weeks. They showed a lot of care, a lot of attention to detail, and excellent judgment whenever a difficult issue arose. And they made my life a lot easier. And they performed a tremendous service for the ASC, so we really appreciate all that you've done. I mentioned we're forming a support group for all the ex-program chairs, and so we'll be sure to get Tim and Susan hooked up with them. I want to thank Chris Etheridge, the ASC Executive Director. Chris, are you here? Where are you? Okay, can you, in the back? Chris, too, devotes enormous effort to the ASC and to putting these meetings together. He deals with literally thousands of issues, some large issues, negotiating the hotel contract, small issues, what color should the tablecloth be. But no matter how crazy things get, he's always calm, he's always in good spirits, and he's an excellent social support to me and to the executive board. And so we're really fortunate to have him. So thank you, Chris. I want to thank the Columbus staff, including the ASC administrator, Susan Case. Susan, are you here? She may not be here. Oh, you are? In the back? In addition to all the many, many things she does, she devoted countless hours to creating the program app. And a great addition, moving us to green criminology. And it was through her efforts that we reduced the size of the hard copy by more than half. So we really appreciate that. I want to thank the close to 250 people that I asked to serve on committees. We have a lot of committees. 99% of the people that I approached said yes, and most said that it would be their pleasure, their privilege to serve. The large share of ASC business is conducted by our committees, and so I want to say to all of you, your service is greatly appreciated. I want to thank my colleagues at Emory who were very supportive, did a lot to make this job easier. I want to thank my students, both current and past, and my past students in particular. They've now become my dear friends and my valued colleagues, and it's been great to work with you all, to see you grow, develop, get your own students, and so on. And of course, last but not least, my family. I won't ask them to stand up because I know they'll be embarrassed and I'll get sanctioned later. But my wife Mary, my daughter Jenny, my son Willie, and they're sitting up here in the front. And finally now, my final act as president, my great privilege. Well, this last year, I got to know Joanne Belknap, and I very quickly discovered, as I'm sure a large number of you already know, what a wonderful person she is. And it's been just a pleasure working with her. And we've been going back and forth. I know she has a lot of great ideas for the San Francisco meetings, for the ASC more generally. She's going to do a fantastic job, and it's my privilege to turn over the ASC gavel to her.
On behalf of everybody, I'm sure in ASC, I just want to thank Bob. He's been an unbelievable president. He has been a great mentor for me, and I just feel really lucky to have learned from you and to have gotten to know you too. So thank you so much. I was also going to thank especially Chris and the Columbus staff as well, who have just been phenomenal, and Susan Case, who text messages me any time of the day or night, and I just really back after what? So, and for anybody who's president-elect, there's a lot of work that year. I didn't realize that. I want to thank Helen Eigenberg for having the vision that someone like me could be president of ASC, because we all laughed at that 5 years ago. And I'm really proud because I am a big-mouth feminist and a very active activist, and that makes me happy that ASC would make that decision. So working on a jail reentry board at home and rape crisis center in particular, I like just having that. The activists, the people on the ground are the ones that keep us humble. And Nancy Wonders and Mona Danner, thank you so much too. I also want to do a shout out for my former students and existing students, because I feel like I've learned way more from you than you ever have from me, and you have shaped me and given me ideas. And Hillary Potter has been the most amazing colleague I've ever had in my life, and one of my very best friends. And she has made me so much better than I would have been as a criminologist. So I just want to do that shout out too. I'm very excited about San Francisco. The theme that I came up with is criminology at the intersections of oppression. And then I left it there, because then it was going to be racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, nationalism, and it just got way too long. But I thought you would get the drift with that. I really want to thank Bonnie Vasey and Bob Apel, who are my program chairs and have already been amazing. I can't wait for everyone to see our program, because we really shook it up. And Nancy Wonders really helped me starting to do that, and then Bonnie Vasey and Bob took it even further, and so it's very different, and I'm really eager for you to see it and see what you think. Thanks for everybody that's agreed to be on all of my committees and on the program, and let's go celebrate in Marquee A, which is on the right, I believe. Thank you so much. Okay.